Hi, Sam.
Hi, Hannah. How are you doing today?
I'm full of dread.
Why are you full of dread?
Oh, because of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Honestly, what I'm curious about is like your relation to today's topics as a boy who grew up doing martial arts.
Yeah.
But now currently man, but former boy who grew up doing martial arts as a boy.
I mean, sometimes I consider myself a boy still.
I know you do. You're wearing a backwards baseball cap right now. Yeah.
So, today we are talking about two topics. And I actually, this is why I love collaborating with you, because had I been doing this, I would have just been talking about power slapping today. And you had the great idea of bringing in a
foil, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
A foil to power slapping, which is Jackass.
Jackass!
So I'm going to start out and talk about power slapping, briefly describe it, go over the rules, and then we'll talk about some of the controversy surrounding it and our thoughts on it. And then we'll go into talking about Jackass and then see how the two compare.
Yeah, and throughout we are, I think, going to be talking a lot about masculinity, about consent, about spectacle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All very charged words in this day and age.
Oh, yeah?
Consent, masculinity, and spectacle. Yeah. I definitely think so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with power slapping.
What could be more American?
Yeah. And I think we're not going to get too much into the history of it, but there certainly has been I think there's a big Russian slap fighting scene.
Yeah, that track.
And I'm sure that like cultures around the world and prior to 2025 have had something very similar, maybe not as crystallized into a company of which Dana White, the CEO of UFC, owns. But certainly, I think there have been men and women hitting each other back and forth for fun for a long time.
Oh, yeah. I've done that with my friends.
Yeah.
You're drunk and you're like, let's slap each other in the face.
Yeah.
Or why don't you hold up my hand, punch as hard as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting from someone who's done martial arts in the past. From that standpoint, you do get a lot of people like, generally when you tell people that like, oh, I'm a black belt, like the first thing they'll ask is, oh, can you beat me up? So there's this.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Like there's this.
That's what I said when you told me that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I don't think it's all the time, but I think that kind of reaction is something that does happen a lot. And I'm sure many people who do martial arts could testify to that. I think it's meant jokingly, obviously, but it is often a reaction that I get more so from guys.
I feel like humor is maybe a way to diffuse discomfort a lot of the time, and maybe the reason why that is a functional joke is that they know that you could beat them up, and maybe that's not very comfortable.
Yeah, and I think there's also this element of, oh, you think you're better than me because you're a black belt. Which is another reason why I think unless you're like an actual paid professional fighter who does this for a living, if you just casually do martial arts on the side or as a hobby, you're probably not going around offering that information to people.
Yeah, I don't think that you think you're better than me because you're a black belt. I think you think you're better than me because you're an environmentalist.
Yeah, well, that's a topic for another. But, okay, so power slapping.
Power slapping.
Yes. So I mentioned before, it is a power slapping, or I should say power slap, is specifically a company that is owned by Dana White, who again is the owner or the CEO of UFC, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship. UFC has been around for 30 plus years as a company. And as we've said, MMA as a sport has been around for a long time.
MMA being mixed martial art. For me, a layperson, I know it as like the most dangerous, like kind of anything goes, toxically masculine, intense sort of competitive fighting, more so than boxing, more so than wrestling.
Yeah. So PowerSlap as a company came along in like 2022, or officially premiered in 2022 or 2023. I can't remember, but we're talking very recent. And let's go over the rules real quick. So interestingly, PowerSlap is a licensed sport by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which the reason it's Nevada is because Las Vegas, and I'm sure there was work done behind the scenes to ensure that it was actually licensed as a sport, because Dana White was going to be premiering it alongside UFC as another sport competition.
Mm-hmm.
So PowerSlap, the company, does use rules similar to those established by other slap fighting leagues.
There are other slap fighting leagues?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, like there are, I don't know about American, I'm sure there are other.
Oh, right, like in Russia and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, like in other countries, I'm sure it is. PowerSlap is the largest, I think, worldwide. And it is largely because of Dana White's influence on it as as a leading character in it. Okay, so back to the rules. So the interesting thing, I think the rules for this are very interesting, because I think really the controversy, because I think some people would throw power slapping in together with MMA and be like, well, what's the difference? Like people are beating the crap out of each other. Why does that make power slapping any worse than MMA? To briefly explain, or to briefly tell you my biases, as far as MMA goes, I think I do respect it as a sport, as a legitimate sport. There is certainly a lot of technique involved in it and skill.
Yeah, see, that's what my instinctive answer to that question, what's the difference, would be. Is it like, well, one requires strategy and skill and like decision making, and the other is just brute force distilled.
I am gonna push back on you a little bit there, because I think, as the rules will show, there is strategy and skill and technique that all goes into power slapping, but I think it is the specific structure of power slapping that makes it something different from MMA.
I am so curious about what kind of strategy goes into power slapping.
Well, as a established sport, there are going to be people training for it. So obviously you're trying to maximize within the limits, within the constraints of the rules, you're trying to maximize the amount of force that you can deliver in a open-handed palm slap to someone's face. And there are rules about where you can hit. Specifically for power slap, it must be below the eye, but above the chin. And you can't lead with the palm. So you have an open palm, but you can't lead with the palm, like to where the butt of your palm is hitting them, such that it would be like more bone than a full open hand. Yeah. So there are constraints on how the slap is delivered. For the person on the receiving side, there are constraints. And this is where I think I would say it, to me, becomes spectacle. And it becomes reality TV. And there is the show, which we'll talk about more. Like, this is like an official competition, just like UFC is, but also just like UFC, this is they kind of make a reality TV show out of it. So for those being slapped, they may not flinch, raise their shoulder, or tuck their chins. So let's just pause on that for a second. So basically, you are not allowed to take any defensive measure. And I think that is the point where we're separating ourselves from MMA, because in MMA, part of the technical aspect of it is knowing how to defend yourself properly. And oftentimes, well, I'm not going to, there's a technique to the defense. So we move to power slap, and in power slap, there is certainly a technique to how you hit the person, but on the receiving side, there's no technique to it. It is simply, you must resist your natural inclination to protect your most sensitive organ in your body, your brain, and merely just take it without flinching. And this is where even like other people in martial arts sports, boxing, even people in the UFC have called out power slapping as being kind of stupid, because there obviously is serious concussive forces that are taken, and that's not unique to power slapping, but to take it in a way that you aren't allowed to defend yourself from it in any given way. I mean, yes, these sports are, to some level consensual, which we'll talk more about, but you're still, you are signing up by doing this sport to receive brain damage. That is for certain. Now, again, like the reality of it is that if you're an MMA fighter, you likely will have brain damage. But there's something about the way in which you are not allowed to protect yourself, which really separates this from the others.
There are such funner ways to sustain brain damage than getting slapped in the face on TV.
Yeah.
So how do you figure that power slapping does involve strategy and skill?
Because, well, we talked about the technique in the actual slap itself.
Well, we talked about the regulations regarding the actual slap itself, but I still don't understand what the technique is besides, with a flat hand, exert as much force as you possibly can.
Well, one other thing we didn't mention was that the slapper, in addition to not being able to lead with their palm, also has a limited range of movement. They're kind of put inside a box, and they can't make any torque of the feet, any twist of the feet, or step outside the box. Any of that will disqualify their slap.
Everything you're saying is making me think that this entails less strategy and technique.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I guess the strategy and skill of this comes from the fact that you are constrained to a point where you have to practice, because as someone who's the technical aspect of this comes from the fact that you are so constrained that you have to spend training time practicing slapping without overexerting your body, without using too much of your body. So you have to gain a technique that is allowable within the rules. And that is a good point. I think that also does make for a way in which this is different from other other MMA type sports where, in UFC or in boxing, as long as you throw a punch, without, I don't know exactly, you can't do like fish hooks where you're like grabbing people's mouth with your fingers. You can't like poke people in the eyes. You can't like grab people's skin. But other than that, if you're striking the person, the technique is kind of open to however you want to throw it. So you have, I guess, you do have in MMA a broader range of the type of technique that you could see. Whereas in power slapping, it's all about being constrained to the point of you must learn how or train yourself to generate as much force as you can within the limits of the rules.
I had just had such an urge to pose the question, what is it about fighting and violence that people find so enthralling?
Yeah.
And then I thought, I demanded that you go see 28 Years Later with me yesterday. I love the Saw franchise. Like, I'm not without sin, so I could ask myself the same question. What is it about violence? What is it about fighting? Yeah. And also, what is it about fictional violence? Like fictional, sensationalized, gratuitous, built violence that I find not just unobjectionable, but entertaining.
Yeah.
And why does that not carry over to fighting sports, which I have no interest in whatsoever?
Yeah, well, I think the distinction there is that there are actual people being harmed. Probably. If there is, to the extent that there is a controversy surrounding MMA, it is that, there is, even in boxing, there's a lot of someone who spends their lifetime as a professional boxer is certainly going to live their later days with some sort of brain damage.
Yeah, I remember there was that, I don't want to call it a controversy because that lends it too much credence. There was the hoax about the Olympic women's boxer secretly being trans, which she was not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who have not really seen much or any boxing watched that fight and were horrified. And
Yeah.
I like had the urge to say, yes, boxing is gross. It is quite distasteful. I also don't care for it. Yeah. You know, I don't think that people who don't watch fighting sports realize how intense they are.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of blood. There is a lot of deformed faces. I didn't show you specifically before we started this, but there are some pretty nasty faces where people get slapped, they stand back up, and their whole half of their face is just like ballooned, and now they're gonna take another slap.
Oh no, I don't like it. I don't like it, Sam.
Yeah. And I think, the spectacle word that you used, I think is a really good point.
It's giving Hunger Games.
Yeah, where, it's no longer fictional, yet in a way it is, because there's almost a way in which TV itself, we have reality TV, and there's an extent to which we recognize that even that is staged, fictional. And so when we see something from a screen, I think spectacle is a great way to describe it, because it's not happening immediately in front of us. It's not like it's on a two-dimensional plane. Even though people are really hitting each other and people are really getting hurt, it makes it easier to digest on the grand scheme of things for some people. You said this is not something you would want to watch. I generally do not watch. I mean, I just don't have an interest. I would say I don't really have much of an interest in sports, watching sports generally. So, I mean, I've certainly watched several UFC bouts before, but more so with friends, and I don't follow it myself.
Yeah, well, but also, if you were to watch a fighting sport, you would be watching people doing something that you know something about, and you'd be able to, assess what they're doing.
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I would just be watching actual people getting hurt. I wouldn't have any insights in it.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do. If you sent me to one martial arts class, I bet I would be a lot more interested all of a sudden in watching a MMA fight.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So, I mean, in that way, I think that is what...
But not the case with power slapping.
Yeah. So, obviously, there have been scientists and doctors that have come out saying that not only is it very kind of... it goes beyond just stupid. It's very... I think they would label it dangerous. Yeah. And they talk about how you can see in some of the... And again, these things happen in boxing. They happen in MMA, but just the fact that they happen in power slapping, I would venture to guess that they're going to happen more often if this sport continues, because there's just no defensive aspect to it. But the doctors talk about this thing called fencing posture, which is, you'll see after the person gets slapped, their whole body kind of curves inward. And I believe it is like an instinctual reaction. It is also very significantly associated with traumatic brain injury. So what you're watching basically is someone's body responding to getting hit so hard that it's trying to... I don't know actually what the fencing posture is trying to do, or if there is an actual biological, physiological benefit to it, but you're watching someone who's undoubtedly leaving that ring with brain injury, traumatic brain injury from the concussive forces.
I mean, probably it's an instinct to curl in because you're kind of wrapping your body around your essential organs, right? In the same way that, if we're scared, we would go into the fetal position.
Yeah. That's kind of what I would think too. I don't know if that's actually the.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. But I think regardless, where there's evidence that these people are undoubtedly experiencing traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm. So there was actually a tweet from a neuroscientist who was also a former wrestler. And, he mentioned and showed the fencing posture and the significance of the traumatic brain injury. And so his comment was, what's next? Who can survive a stabbing? Yeah. So it's at what level do we draw the line, or at what point do we draw the line and say, okay, sure, we can get people to agree to do this. And that's where I'd like to go with this, to speak of it more from a sociological standpoint is the other thing he said is that people who aren't taking these risks are exploiting those who do. So, I mean, in the sense that it is consensual, yes, the people who are competing in power slapping and going up into this ring have agreed and to a certain extent know the risks. But I think there is an argument to be had that these are also people who are possibly being exploited in the sense that they are being promised money and fame for doing something that will undoubtedly alter their lives because, and they pursue it, maybe certainly in part because they want to do it, but also in part because of the money. I imagine, and I don't know the statistics behind it, but I imagine that there are not many people who are making a quote unquote decent wage or decent living who are going into this.
Yeah, that's what about it feels different from something like a hot dog eating contest. Like even the elite hot dog eating contest, like very few of those hot dog eaters, that's their whole career. Most of them have their day jobs, and that's like a fun, wacky thing they do.
Yeah.
And something like power slapping, which also appears silly.
Yeah.
Is at the same time much more physically harmful, and perhaps people are, not doing it as a break from their day jobs.
Yeah. And I think there's probably the maybe clearest association we can draw here is gladiators.
What?
Or football. That too. Well, and there's an interesting discussion for another time about football. Again, there's a degree of separation between football, between MMA, between boxing, and something like power slapping. Because yes, in all four of those activities, there's a degree in which you're more likely to come out of it having brain injury. And now we're going on a break. We'll be back to talk about
Dana White.
And we are back. I want to finish talking about the last section. Did you have any other thoughts when talking about I mentioned gladiators, you mentioned football, way in which as a society we can sometimes exploit those who are quote unquote in the lower class to have something to aspire to for fame and a way to make a living that is very harmful to them and is to the quote unquote upper class a source of entertainment. So it's kind of, in a way, it's like, dangling a carrot for someone to do something that you watch them struggle to try and grab the carrot, giving those kind of vibes. Did you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's a Marxist thing, right? If you have to sell your labor to survive, then you are in many, if not most cases, selling your body, selling the use of your body, whether that be manual labor, factory labor, sex work, pro sports. I mean, hell, an example comes to mind of like ballet dancers and ballet companies advocating to learn different tracks in the different ballets. So you're not just doing the same choreography day after day after day, which breaks down your body a lot more quickly than if you're doing different choreography on different days, but costs the company more money because you have to teach the same dancers different tracks.
Yeah.
So, and this is a concept that we see satirized in stories like Squid Game, Hunger Games, Battle Royale, because it's what it actually is a matter of degree. To what degree are we breaking people's bodies at the altar of capitalism at the altar of growth? And to what degree do the people entering into that transaction have agency in it?
Yeah.
To what degree do they have other options?
No more is it more prevalent than in power slapping, I would venture to say.
It's a really great distillation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing we want to talk about is a interesting event that happened before the premiere of the first season of PowerSlap Road to the Title, which was kind of, as I mentioned before, this reality series that they made to go alongside the actual PowerSlap competition, much like they do with UFC. But so and I'm not going to give exact dates here because you can go on Wikipedia and look it up. But effectively, the show was supposed to premiere like the first week of January of 2022 or 2023. On New Year's Eve of the week before the premiere, a video came out where Dana White, the CEO and owner of PowerSlap, was caught slapping his wife. And because of that controversy, the show ended up getting delayed a full week.
No.
Let's unpack that.
There's a lot to unpack here. Yeah, but like, can I just tell you my knee-jerk reaction?
Yeah.
My knee-jerk reaction is, power slapping. It seems to me a very like male-dominated, masculine-coded activity, because women would be less likely to elect to do something like that for fun because the threat of violence looms larger in our everyday lives.
Yeah. And to be clear, there is a women power slap division.
Yeah.
To me, whether or not Dana White slapped his wife.
Didn't you just say that it was on video?
Oh, no. Yeah. What I mean to say is not whether he had or hadn't slapped his wife. I still think this sport would be deserving of the controversy that it has garnered.
Mm-hmm.
I think this event where he slapped his wife and it was caught on camera is just kind of emblematic of the problems that surround this type of sport. I'll go on to say now that I am not a big fan of MMA. I find that MMA brings a lot of hostility in competition. You know, it's funny. One of the best examples of like a martial arts fight that and of course, you know, I'm referring to both real and fictional. But one of the best portrayals of it that has stuck within my head for the past 25 years of my life is one of the very first episodes of Power Rangers. And in it, Jason, the Red Ranger, and like Tommy, the Green Ranger, future like Power Rangers together, but at the time like didn't know each other, are sparring with each other. And
in like a karate class or something?
In like a karate class. And they're both showing off incredible skill, which I think all UFC fighters do. But then at the end of it, there's just there was so much respect, so much like recognition of the other person's abilities and skills. And I'm sure some people are going to listen to this and say, well, yeah, it's Power Rangers, it's a kid's show. They're not going to have them like beating each other until they're bloody. I get that. And also, I know that in UFC, you know, there's a lot of often drama stirred up before matches, and then afterwards, the competitors generally are somewhat like they tend to recognize the skills of the other person, and they're to a certain extent respectful. But it is again, with, you know, alongside with the spectacle of the kind of reality TV aspect of UFC, it just brings in a lot of this just vitriol kind of towards the other person, and a lack of respect. And it's not that couldn't be seen in other sports too. You know, I'm not certainly not saying that UFC is unique in that, or that PowerSlap is unique in that, but there's a way in which it's very much about, more than in any other sport, just like being this sense that you are just dominating this other person. You are hierarchically superior to them, and can physically, to a certain extent, you could physically kill them. I mean, that's kind of, it almost goes there for me in UFC. And that's why I don't like it. I don't think that's a reason that it should be stopped. I'm not, going to advocate for it to, that people should stop watching it. But it does breed this certain culture. And alongside with this example of Dana White slapping his wife, which, I was going to say, to be fair to Dana White, I don't...
Let's not be fair to Dana White.
Yeah, I don't think we need to be fair to Dana White.
No, I would love to be very unfair to him.
Yeah.
I don't think that people should be slapping their wives, and I'll go on the record as saying that.
Yes, for sure. Dana White also said that what he did was horrible and that there's no excuse for it and that he deserves all the crap that gets thrown at him for that.
All right, good. Let's throw some literal crap at him.
Yeah.
I don't like that man.
Yeah. But I think the point here is that it's not about Dana White being the person he is and corrupting this sport. I think it's about, it's a more of a broader issue with these types of behaviors that draws out this hatred, this cruelty, this vitriol, this othering of people.
I'm going to throw in, while we're talking about this, the definition of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity in gender studies refers to not the idea that masculinity is toxic in and of itself. That's a very common misconception, but a type of masculinity that is defined by violence or the threat of violence. So the idea is that if a presentation of masculinity or a masculine identity is rooted in the concept of like being able to do violence to other people, that's what toxic masculinity is. Yeah. And like, I just wanted to throw that explanation in because I think we're going to be tossing that phrase around a lot during this conversation. I also had a thought while I was listening to you talk. I was remembering when I was in like middle school and high school, and I just had no interest in sports, and I did a lot of theater. And I remember like articulating when I was a teenager, like, I like the idea of cooperation, of collaboration, and of like striving for something great with a team of other people. But there was something that seemed ugly to me about doing that with the end goal of beating another team of people, as opposed to the end goal of just creating a piece of art that was as good as it can be. And like, I remember, I'm not that, dogmatic about it anymore. I understand like the value of healthy, cordial, respectful competition and sportsmanship as like a way to bring people together. But my prefrontal cortex was not developed at the time that I came up with that. So, but as I got older, I was one of those people who like started moving my body more in my 30s. And the way that I became a fitness girly was I got it in my head that I wanted to do a Tough Mudder. And I love to tell people about Tough Mudders. I'm like the biggest Tough Mudder evangelist. Tough Mudders, for anyone who doesn't know, they're an obstacle course, a very messy obstacle course, lots and lots of mud. And you're supposed to, in doing these obstacles, they're supposed to present you with common fears, like fear of heights, fear of enclosed spaces, fear of extreme cold. What else? And fear of electricity. And so when you see like pictures and videos of these events, like they seem very intense. You see people like very wet, very dirty, falling from extreme heights. Their faces are showing like a grimace. And it might even look a little bit disturbing, like to look at it, until you find out that in a Tough Mudder, it is not a competition. There are no winners and losers. You don't have to do any of the obstacles. They tell you at the beginning, the only way that you can fail today is if you don't push yourself as hard as you can, and the only person who will be able to tell you whether or not you failed is you. And they're very collaborative. The obstacles are built in such a way that nobody could possibly get over a lot of them without help. You're supposed to help others, and not just the people that you came there with, but strangers. So I've had like incredibly affirming experiences doing Tough Mudders. falling from, 8 feet up in the air and a complete stranger caught me, dragging somebody up a mudslide, being part of a human ladder and then climbing up that ladder. And it's interesting because it's confrontational and it's messy and it's ridiculous and it's intense and you get hurt. Like, after the first one that I did, my friends and I sent pictures of like what our legs looked like, our bruises and scrapes and stuff. But it's not competitive and it's not confrontational at all.
Yeah.
And I think like when I started getting into it, when I started like getting that feeling of, competing against my own prior physical capabilities or competing against my own like mental limits and cooperating with others to do things that I thought maybe I couldn't do, feeling that adrenaline pumping, feeling that shaking in my hands and like pushing through the fear, I was like, wow, I'm feeling masculine in a way that I never have before. Yeah. I get it. I want to get really muddy and jump out of that tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait to do one. And
yeah.
even more so, I can't wait to do one with you.
Oh, yeah. It'll be very different from when we're at the beach and it takes me 10 minutes to get into the water.
Yeah.
We will be jumping into ice water.
Yeah. Which, as I've told you, is the best way to do it.
Yeah, you're right. I think, like, I associate political conservatism with a dogmatic belief in strict gender differences.
Yes.
And a dogmatic belief in natural hierarchies.
Yeah.
And like if you really believe in natural hierarchies and essentialist gender differences,
yeah,
I think a fixation on violence and the threat of violence naturally follows that.
Yeah. Because it's proving what you already believe lies at the kind of the foundation of society.
Yeah. And so it makes sense to me that it follows to like build spectacles and entertainment that are about violent competition and watching people get hurt.
And I think that's a great segue into talking about Jackass.
Jackass.
Do you want to take a break and get some coffee? Okay. Part 3, Jackass.
Part 3, Jackass.
Coming to an earbud near you soon. A great foil to PowerSlap, the show, is Jackass, the show. And this is something that you know more about than me, so I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, I'm a Jackass expert.
Yeah. You listen to one podcast.
I listened to one podcast episode, an episode of a great podcast called American Hysteria, which is much better researched and more beautifully written than anything that I'm saying on mic right now. But we're bringing new connections in. Yeah. So we're traveling 22 years prior to the premiere of PowerSlap when and this is, I'm reading right off Wikipedia right now, an American reality slapstick comedy television series and media franchise was created by Jeff Tremaine, Spike Jones, and Johnny Knoxville. This was an MTV show. If you are a millennial, you probably recall it from your youth, even if you weren't a fan. I certainly wasn't a fan. I found it so distasteful. And I lumped it in my head with this culture of crudeness and violence and messiness and confrontation that I didn't like. Not unfairly, but basically Jackass was comedians, entertainers, pro skateboarders. That was a big part of it. It came out of the pro skateboarding scene, doing physical stunts for comedic purposes. So we just watched a few clips before we started recording. My favorite was the duck hunting one.
Yeah. You want me to describe it?
Yeah, you describe it.
Okay. So in the duck hunting, if you have not seen this, there are several men sitting in a boat with paintball guns. And they've got their
hunting hats.
They got their hunting hats, their hunting gear, their camo. They are ready to go. And they are waiting for 2 men to jump off a bucket truck, it looks like, into onto one of those inflatable, I don't even know what you would call it. It basically
It's like a giant ass air mattress that is not all the way inflated.
Yeah, or like a giant bean bag, and like the two men jump off the bucket truck, land on one end, and there is subsequently another man on the other end dressed up like a duck, and he goes flying into the air, and the men in the boat mercilessly shoot him with paintball guns and try to get many welts on him as they can before he lands in the water.
And everyone is quacking.
Yes.
It's silly. It's violent. It is notably not fighting. And I think like the biggest difference that comes to mind between Jackass and PowerSlapping is the creativity involved in one and not the other. That they're both using harm to the human body as entertainment and spectacle. One is doing it in a way where the people who are undergoing the physical harm are the people who are coming up with the stunts that they're performing that are as much comedy bits as they are physical stunts. And they are harming themselves and each other.
Yeah.
Whereas you see something like PowerSlapping, the participants who are undergoing the physical harm, they didn't come up with the idea.
Yeah.
And there's an aesthetic of structure and rules that are enforced by the institution. Whereas Jackass is like chaos coming from the cast who invented this show themselves. For that reason, it just doesn't leave as bad of a taste in my mouth.
Yeah. And there's no one who's not getting their fair share of the violence.
Oh, yeah. No, most of the time with a Jackass stunt, the person who came up with it is the person who then does it. So what kind of Jackass stunts are there? Was the duck hunting one that we just talked about. There are like gross out ones where like, you know, they eat gross stuff.
Yeah.
There are ones involving fire and aerosol cans. A lot of them are skateboarding based, and then they pull pranks on each other. Something noteworthy to me about Jackass is, okay, two noteworthy things about Jackass. The first, this is a cast of all white men, and it's coming out of this Gen X skateboarding culture, and it's presenting this aesthetic of like chaos and gleeful nihilism. And I think that's political, or at least it exists within a political context. And I see it as separate and apart from toxic masculinity conservatism.
This was definitely not a show. I mean, to be fair, MMA wasn't something that we watched growing up. It wasn't something that my parents watched. But this, there's a sense in which I would argue that something like this would be more crude and less likely to appeal to someone with a conservative background such as mine than something like MMA.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. But when I think of like leftist sensibilities and leftist aesthetics now in 2025, I do not think of something like Jackass or a comedian like Lenny Bruce or George Carlin. I don't think of performance art that's really irreverent and intense and inappropriate for children. But historically, like, that kind of performance art has been a force for progressive politics. And I think in the fact that the cast of Jackass is, you know, all white men, that it's coming out of Gen X skater culture, the concept that Chelsea Weber-Smith introduced in their episode about Jackass on American Hysteria, one of many great concepts that they introduced, was the idea that, like, you know, the next generation of white men coming after the civil rights movement, coming after second wave feminism, they might not know what to do with themselves or what to do with their white privilege or their male privilege.
Yeah.
And so there's this I'm going to take this punishment to my body in an entertaining spectacle for people to enjoy because nothing matters. And isn't that hilarious and delightful?
Yeah.
I find that weirdly charming, you know, conceptually, even though I don't want to sit down and watch Jackass. Yeah. And then another aspect of it that is deceptively progressive is there's a lot of homosociality, shall we say. There's a lot of kissing and hugging and grabbing each other on the butts and, you know, using your schmuck for stunts, using your butt for stunts. There's a fixation on the genitals and the butthole, and an interaction with each other's genitals and butthole among all these straight guys. Yeah. You know, that is weirdly accepting of queerness. Yeah. John Waters is a big fan of Jackass. Yeah. John Waters is somebody who I would also lump with those other performance artists I listed off earlier who do like really irreverent in your face stuff, and it's more pushing a progressive social message. And there are quotes from the cast of Jackass where they're very aware that this is what they're doing. They say we like to bucket to homophobes, make them uncomfortable with this homoeroticism that we shared between us. Yeah. And another thing that was noteworthy for me about Jackass that when I was a kid I found very uncomfortable, and now as an adult I'm like, no, that seems fine, mostly, is Jackass and the magazine. So there was this magazine called Big Brother that Johnny Knoxville, I believe, was associated with before Jackass came to be. And it was a skater magazine, and it was, you know, similarly controversial, similarly the topic of moral panics. There was a skater featured in that magazine who had dwarfism, whose name is escaping me. And then there was a cast member of Jackass who also has dwarfism, Jason Weeman Acuna. You know, at the time I read the inclusion of a visibly physically disabled person in this cast, not incorrectly, as something of a modern day freak show. You know, this is really dirty and ugly, and they're doing a lot of death-defying stunts, and oh look, there's a little person. Yeah. There's something in the American freak show tradition, something about like the spectacle of the other going on there. But at the same time, like, this was also an incredible athlete and a comedic entertainer in a cast of incredible athletes and comedic entertainers. Yeah. Without much differentiation. Yeah. And I feel like you can draw the line from the inclusion of Jason Weeman Acuna on Jackass to the inclusion of, I believe, 2 members of the Harlem Globetrotters who have dwarfism. Mm. If you go see a Harlem Globetrotters game, their dwarfism is not commented upon. Mm. I think they'd like bring out the trampolines more for those guys. Yeah. But no, that's about it. And it's funny because the Harlem Globetrotters are very vaudevillian, like physical comedy sketches. Yeah. And they don't, the height, the disability of these athletes is not part of the comedy show. Yeah. And likewise with Jackass, like, obviously his moniker was Wee Man, but like, he was just one of the dudes. Like, he was planning stunts, he was participating in stunts, he was pranking his friends. Yeah. There was a real passive acceptance that I don't think that you would have found in a lot of other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of got to the point of why we're doing this episode particularly, is that we're juxtaposing PowerSlap and Jackass, and I think the difference between the two after our discussion here is really the egalitarianism of Jackass. Mm-hmm. As you were describing the nature of Jackass, the chaoticness of it, there's this somewhat diverse group of white guys who are coming up with stunts and harming themselves physically for entertainment in the same way that a power slap fighter would. But in the power slap competition, Dana White isn't competing. And I think that speaks to a major difference between the two, and a way in which I don't know if we can tease out now or if, but like a representation of two different kinds of masculinity.
Yeah. There are infinite kinds of masculinity, and we're just talking about these two right now.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
And I think
there's also the Mr. Rogers masculinity. There's the strong stoic father masculinity. There's a lot.
And I think that, if we're talking about how we live in a society together, how we love in a society together, there's a way in which Jackass, as a form of entertainment involving physical harm, does a better job at utilizing masculinity to showcase its entertainment that, in a similar way, PowerSlap does not.
And I think, there's something inherently anti-hierarchical about gleeful nihilism. If nothing matters, then how can ingrained hierarchies possibly matter?
Yeah.
If nothing matters, then how can we possibly be attached to what we see as natural hierarchies and the need to enforce them?
Yeah.
And in that sense, I feel like this kind of goofy nihilism that Jackass embodies is a sort of egalitarian ideology. And I feel like that's where the simultaneous acceptance and mockery of queerness is very in line with that kind of ideology or lack of ideology.
Yeah.
And I find it charming.
Yeah.
In
a way that
abstractly.
Yeah, in a way that PowerSlap does not capture.
No.
Because
even though surface level, it's
it's very silly.
Yeah, it's silly and its body's in jeopardy in a silly way.
And that's really the point, is that on the surface level, these two things seem like they would come from the same types of masculinity. But I think what we've really tried to show here is that they don't.
No, they don't.
There's an important distinction between them, maybe not like a moral one per se. Other than Dana White, and I'm sure there are other people other than Dana White who participate in PowerSlap. I don't think it's necessarily that the people who participate in this show are morally wrong, but it's just as a product of a sociological phenomenon within
the social values that it espouses.
Are, I would say, problematic in a way that Jackass isn't.
Yeah. Weird wholesomeness is, and also I'm gonna add that as a student of comedy, PowerSlap has one joke, and it's we're watching somebody get slapped in the face.
Yeah.
Jackass has infinite jokes, and most of them are about buttholes.
Yeah. And on that note, I will say that I think we have found a way to love in society slightly better today.
Oh, what's that?
I think if I had to distill it into a word or a theme, I think it'd be, if you're going to do physical harm for comedy, make it equal.
Yeah.
Everyone gets their fair share as long as they're consenting.
Yeah. I'm going to say, don't dismiss a freak show. I feel like I'm somebody who has dismissed a lot of freak shows in my day. And a lot of the time I return to them and I go, oh no, there was value in this, but it invoked discomfort in me.
Yeah.
Because of a way that I prefer not to feel like I am visible. And because of internalized ideas about what taste is, what good art is, that we can always do well to question.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna put your body in jeopardy for entertainment, then for God's sake, at least be creative about it. Yeah.
I enjoyed talking about this with you today, and I think a lot of the things that we discuss here today we will go on to discuss in more episodes.
Yeah.
But this was the first of our kind of like non-book, non-movie episodes where we just kind of look at something in society and talk about it, and I think it went really well.
Yeah, I have so much more fun talking about power slapping and Jackass than I would actually watching power slapping or Jackass.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that.
Let's go rock climb.
Yeah.
Yay! What word should I use for dick?
Schmuck.